extra, yeah, a bit more experience than me, Jimmy.
That's fair enough. There you go. I'm Owen Ruby.
You take that one. Thank you very much. Good evening.
How are you?
Good evening, Jimmy. Look, first of all, congratulations. Your book, Working Class Man, as soon as you released it, went straight to #1. And I can't believe it's already been 12 months since you were sitting here and we were talking about Working Class Boy. Of course, that book went to #1 as well, and it knocked off Harry Potter's J.K. Rowling and Andy Griffiths right out of his treehouse to become #1. Once again, huge congratulations. You are now actually have the title of the most successful writer as well. So huge congratulations. You must be feeling the love.
Very good, thank you. I'm as shocked as you are, don't worry.
And I know that you've, in the past few weeks, you've been doing heaps of book signing and interviews and all that sort of stuff. How is the repetitive strain injury, Jimmy?
It's, I've signed the first week, I think I signed about 35,000 books.
I know.
So I'm lying in bed with ice packs on, but it's okay, it's good. It could be worse.
Fantastic. Well, let's
Could be
talk.
numb.
Let's talk about Working Class Man. Of course, we started with the Working Class Boy, and I remembered at the time you said that when you started writing it, as soon as you started putting pen to paper, it flowed so easily for you. And I mean, of course, you've done a lot of songwriting as well, but writing your own autobiography is quite different. So how did it go this time? Was it still that nice, easy, relaxed way of writing?
Well, the writing itself was sort of, fairly easy process, but it wasn't, the subject matter wasn't that easy.
Yes.
But both books, it was when I sat down, the first thing I did was try to write, try to be like an author. It didn't work. It didn't work at all. So
how do you mean you tried to be like an author? Like,
when you sit and you think you're going to write a book, you start getting all this. And on the first day I woke up, and that didn't work at all. So what I had to do was sort of shake all that off, and I just sat down and tried to write as if I was speaking to people. If I was talking to somebody, I should have been lying on a couch like this, talking to the shrink. So I just once I found that my voice that way, then it was just a matter of sitting down and digesting, the thought process, what I was trying to say, what I was trying to get out, and basically that flowed. I didn't plan it. I didn't map it out. It just it was like stream of consciousness.
And of course, with all the things that you've written in the book, and there was a lot of things that you probably would have found very difficult to share. And I just finished reading your book, and what strikes me the most is that even with the bad stuff, along with the good stuff, is that you have this amazing sense of humour which jumps out at you at nearly every single page. So I think your sense of humour is what's helped you survive, I guess?
I think it's quite common in northern Britain, particularly. Most of Britain, I think, they tend to, when times get tough, people make jokes about it. And that's how we deal with sort of sensitive issues. We deal with, problems at home, problems with your girl, problems with everything. You make a joke about it, which I've said on the last tour I did, tends to get me in a lot of trouble. But I tried my best not to make fun or make jokes at every turn, because because I didn't want to. These are serious subjects. I didn't want to sort of trivialize it, and that was But there was times where it was just getting so intense. I'd have to. It's like a pressure valve for me. I'd have to make it sort of a little funny occasionally.
But of course it is like a therapy as well. When you're sitting there writing everything that's coming from your head and you're actually writing it down and admitting some of the things that perhaps you never did before, it's a great therapy as well.
Yeah, well, you see, the thing is, I've admitted them before, but only to myself. Yes. So to sit down and look at these, to look at these, the first book was sort of easier in a way, because it was sort of, a lot of the stuff was beyond my control, and a lot of the stuff, I was sort of an observer and just, it was happening around me and to me. With this second book, it's, there's a certain aspect of the book I know that there is a knock-on effect from that childhood, but as an adult, when you get to once you become an adult, you have to accept responsibility for your own actions. So there was things where, I can look at it and see why I behaved in certain ways, but I still have to take responsibility for it. So there was things that it was tough to write, and it's tough, to share with, especially with strangers. And really the only reason I did it is because, that's first off, like I said, it was for me, it was like therapy. I had to go through this to get it out for myself. Secondly, the first book had such an impact on people, you know, who I found so many people who related to it on one form or another, or that had seen it or lived it, or their parents had done it, or, you know, they knew people who were going through situations like that, whether it was the booze or the domestic violence or abuse or whatever. And this book, I figured, there's so many people go through that sort of childhood or that sort of a trauma. They must be, like me, they must be affected by it. And you can't have had that or lived through that without being affected by it as an adult. So I figured there's a lot of other people out there who you know, just because I'm a rock and roll singer, it was wrapped around a different sort of story, but it's a common thing. It's a common thing that we all share. We all try to, you know, fight our own demons and fight our own, you know, battles and try to come out, you know, and keep your head above water.
Well, look, let's talk about the book, and you open the book with talking about the lowest point of your life, which was an attempted suicide in New Zealand. Of course, that would have been hard to admit, hard to write, but you decided to put it out there, and you started with that. I actually liked the way you started at that point and then worked your way back, so we could find out, you know, why you came to that point.
Yes. But really, that was when I wanted to write. I mean, that point. And I've got to say, it wasn't like I'd sat and thought that I was, you know, that I wanted to commit suicide. And I never thought. I used to joke that, and I think I said it in the book, that I always joked that I was homicidal, not suicidal. But you know, the fact is, at that point, you know, I remember going to bed that night. Vaguely remember going to bed that night because I was so out of it, so smashed, and it had been, you know, my troubles and my drug abuse, my alcohol, not dealing with my past, had been just snowballing to the point where it was like a continual chatter. I couldn't hear, I couldn't see straight, I couldn't think straight, and all I was doing was drinking and taking as many drugs as I could so that I didn't feel and I didn't think. And by that point, it didn't seem to matter how much I took or how much I drank, I could still feel those demons snapping at my heels. And that night, I wasn't trying to commit suicide. Most nights by this point, I would knock myself down to sleep, even if it was after a few days, by taking, you know, handfuls of pills and whatever I could get my hands on to sleep. That night, I just thought Jane had gone to bed and she was asleep. You know, we'd had a lot of, you know, pressure on the two of us, and I didn't want to wake her. And I just grabbed everything from the minibar. I took, you know, those little bottles, 2 bottles of vodka, 2 bottles of scotch. It was like the Ark. 2 bottles of bourbon. It's the Ark in reverse, obviously. And then I lay in bed and quietly as I could, I drank them and swallowed sleep tablets, not to commit suicide, but just to shut the voices down, so I could get some sleep. And it worked. It knocked me out, right? And I woke up the next morning. I was sort of a bit hazy, as you would be, of course. And I could hear Jane in the lounge room. And this is the other thing. We were in a big suite. You know, it was a really, you know, we were in Auckland in a big suite in a nice hotel. Well, you know, and I feel a bit ungrateful when I think about it. But it didn't matter where I was. But I woke up in this hotel, and I could hear Jane, and I walked out, and it was Jane trying to be cheerful. You know, my demons had been killing her as well as me, and she's trying to be cheerful. And she said, let's just start fresh. Let's go and have a walk and shake it off. And I said, yeah, good, you know, that's good, baby. And I went to get changed into the room where the suitcases were, and I was putting my jeans on, and that's when I seen this dressing gown cord, you know, hanging off a rail in the room, and it was only then that I remembered even you know doing this. And at first it was sort of like, it was like watching a horror movie. It was like sort of a bit scratchy and like an old movie, you know. And suddenly I went, oh shit, I remember that. I had gone to sleep, and I'd woken up in the middle of the night, and for some reason, I don't know what I was dreaming or what I was thinking. I'm sure it was chemistry, you know, it was all chemicals. I got up, and I remember thinking, it's going to be easier. It must be, you know, I've heard people, you know, hanging themselves. It must be easier than dealing with this shit. And then I think it was even sort of, it wasn't sort of like frightening or desperate. It was just sort of, I wonder how hard it is. Go and try it. And I remember I had this thing around my neck and you know, dropped all my weight onto it and just lay there, and nothing happened. You know, I didn't die. And I lay there for a while, and then I, oh well, that didn't work, I'll go back to bed. And it's so surreal, And I went back to bed and I completely forgot about it until I seen that thing there. And when I seen it, I panicked and I quickly took it down and put it back in the dressing gown. And I thought, I'm not going to tell anybody this. This is too much. But I knew at that point that things had gone too far and I was going to have to make some radical changes. And those changes, they came over the next few days and over the next few weeks, and it wasn't something I just went, hey, I'm all better now. It was stuff like I had to think about it, because I've been fighting and battling with my demons, trying to save my life as it was, trying to save a career, trying to save a marriage, trying to save this, trying to save an image, and I realized then, I might not be able to save any of that, but if I can save my life, then it's worth something. So I had to sort of had to let go of everything and start building from the ground up. And to do that, I had to get some help. And I remember, because I come from a Glaswegian background, and Glaswegians are pretty tough, and we don't, where I came from, the blokes don't ask for help, and blokes, but if you go and see a psychiatrist, you're crazy, It's true, by the way. But and blokes didn't ask for help. It wasn't the right thing to do. And but I always thought I was tough and brave and all this sort of stuff. But I can tell you, I know for a fact, the bravest and the most courageous thing I've done was when I finally let go and asked for help. And that was like for me. And suddenly things turned around, and it wasn't like I was better overnight. But suddenly I felt something good about myself. Instead of, I was, no matter how many #1 records I had, how many concerts I did, I didn't like myself. And I didn't think if anybody knew me, they would like me either. But at that point, I started to see something I liked in myself.
Well, we're very glad that you were unsuccessful.
And I've got friends, I have friends who've hung themselves. And it was,
because things can get better, that's the thing. I mean, as you say, it's at their lowest point, but people, if they got past that and got help, they would see.
I think it's that momentary, like the one wrong decision, one wrong chemical, combination, and it can just be a stupid moment. And I've got friends who maybe have got to that point and didn't survive it. And I know how devastating it was for their families, and I know how devastating it was for the people that were left behind. And so I don't look at this in any way as a great milestone. It was the ultimate. I hit the depths of as low as I could go, and I was so lucky to sort of survive it.
I was actually quite flabbergasted to read just on more of the addiction before we move on to other topics. I was actually quite flabbergasted to read just how much you consumed. I read on a daily basis you could down 3 bottles of vodka, 10 grams of Coke, which actually caused nasty inflammation and bleeding in your nose. So then you needed to take a handful of Nurofen to take down the inflammation so that you could snort the Coke again.
I'd take that before I did it.
Yeah, and then on top of that, uppers, downers, speed, and then you mentioned ketamine, which I had to look up because I had no idea what ketamine was.
It's just a good thing you don't know. Yeah, I would just take anything I could get my hands on.
And still then to get up and function and do a concert and a show, I just don't know how you did that.
Well, I do. I did it badly. I can see. I see photos of myself in those periods. And I look like my wife for a while had a photo in a wallet that she used to remind me and show me, and I looked like Gollum. I was just wasted. And I really think probably the only thing that kept me going, those shows, for instance, I think a lot of it would have been the expectations of the crowd. I think maybe I got there and they were sort of willing me to keep moving. I don't know how good they were. I know that for God knows how many years I didn't do a straight show or a sober show, and I didn't think I could do one sober or straight. But now, like after 5 years ago, now I think to myself, I don't know how I could possibly do a show, like have a line of Coke and go and stand in front of a bunch of strangers and try and sing. I don't know how I did it, So it's just that it's you know, one thing I really definitely tried not to do was glorify drug use or alcoholism in this book, because it was something that nearly destroyed me, and it nearly destroyed my family, and I've seen it, you know, wreak havoc with everybody that's been involved in it.
Well, look, apart from the bad things, there was a lot of
good things.
there was a lot of good things, and of course you talk.
She left that alone, eh?
You talk about your love, you know, the Cold Chisel guys, you were like a family, and there's a couple of funny stories, and I did want to pick on one of them. The story of Ian Moss, of course, he had an aversion to wearing clothes, and one night you went out, he didn't want to go with you, he wanted to stay back and sort of do a bit of guitar strumming and practice, so you guys went out, you came back, it was the middle of the night, it was like -5 degrees. Tell us what happened, I love that story.
So, see, Mossie's a country boy, and he's sort of, you know, and Mossy does like to just sort of not wear any clothes. You know? And you know, there's reasons for this, but I can't talk about them now. But Mossy was one of these guys, and he's really laid back. Mossy just he liked to play his guitar, and this time, you know, we were living 25 miles out of town, Armidale, New South Wales. 10 miles of that was dirt road, and we had a baker's truck, and that was the only that's the only transport we had. So, and the house was like, there's no neighbours. So if you went out, we all had to go out, otherwise you were stuck there, right? So this night we were going out for a drink, and Mossy said, you know, I remember he was there, I can't remember, he might have been naked or he could have had a towel on, but he's practicing his guitar. And he's going, I'm just going to stay and practice. And we left, and we said, it'll be a long night. He said, yeah, no worries. So we went into town, it was about midnight, we're driving back down the highway, and it got really cold, started snowing, turned off the main highway onto the dirt road, and about 8 or 10 miles from our house, the van comes to this sort of sliding stop, and we all get tossed around in the back of the van. Michael, the roadie, had seen something in the headlights, and he wasn't sure what it was. It was up in the distance, and it's foggy and snowy and all that, and you know, we're on the back, oh, it's a Yeti, you know, it's a Yeti. It's a monkey or something, it's a gorilla, you know, we couldn't see properly. And the thing is, it's near a place called Uralla, and Uralla is famous for Thunderbolt. There's a bush ranger. Thunderbolt used to jump out from behind rocks with a big gun, and you know, stand and deliver. Eventually, our eyes adjusted, and we realised it wasn't Thunderbolt, and it wasn't a gun. It was Mossy, and he was naked in the middle of the road, 10 miles from the house. And so we pull up to him, and we said, what are you doing, man? Get in the car. And he just sort of went, oh, it was such a beautiful night, you know. And went for a walk, you know, and we took him home, and, you know, it was a very awkward drive back to the house. You know? None of us knew where to look, you know. And we got back, and thankfully for us, you know, all these extremities were still in place, and we still had a guitar player.
And that's what's great about the book. There's so many funny stories in between, you know, the sad and the bad stuff as well. I want to go now to 1977, to the Checkers famous old nightclub, where your band manager, who became an integral part of Cold Chisel for the next 32 years, Ron Willis, met you at Checkers, and so you played in Checkers nightclub, and this was primarily, and this was primarily a disco club, so it was like disco meets Cold Chisel. That's like chalk and cheese.
Yeah, no, but it was like every club in that point in the 70s was a disco club. But Checkers was a famous, you know, Johnny O'Keefe used to play there. And the first time I ever seen AC/DC was in Checkers. So Checkers had a really great, you know, reputation as a rock and roll club too. But it was sort of like, you know, they had like showgirls in the 50s and stuff like this. It was all, everything was red carpet, and you know, by the time, you know, it was a rock and roll club, you know, it was like, if you stood still too long, you get bitten by fleas, you know. It was an awesome club, and we used to play, you know, 5, 6 sets a night there, and you know, every half hour, it'd be half hour on, and we'd start playing, and we'd be trying our best, and nobody on the dance floor, not a soul.